Welcome to day 130 on the trail. We have four readings for today. From John chapter 11, verses 28 through 44, Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 46 through chapter 2, verse 25, Psalms 108 and 109, and 1 Maccabees chapter 6, verses 48 through 63. In John's Gospel, we continue the story of Jesus returning to Bethany after the death of Lazarus. Jesus has not yet entered the village when Martha, the sister of Lazarus, comes to meet him. When she arrives, she says to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus responds to Martha with a powerful statement of the hope of the resurrection and eternal life. Martha then responds with one of the most inspiring confessions of faith in the New Testament. Before all those gathered around them, Martha proclaims that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. After this, Martha returns home to tell her sister Mary that Jesus has arrived and is asking to meet with her. Mary quickly goes to meet Jesus, who is still outside of Bethany. We pick up our story in verse 31. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Notice that Mary makes the exact same statement to Jesus as Martha. However, the response of Jesus is vastly different. Beginning in verse 33. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. To be honest, when I read the different responses from Jesus to the same statement made by Mary and Martha, I am left with more questions than answers. Instead of discussing the power and reality of resurrection with Mary, Jesus is greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. So what does it mean that Jesus was greatly disturbed? In other places in the Bible, this phrase is typically associated with being agitated, angry, or having fierce indignation. Now, some translators take a softer approach. They say that Jesus is moved or distressed, especially since he weeps just a few moments later. However, there is a significant distinction between these two approaches. For example, if my wife Stacy texts me to say that she is greatly disturbed, come home now, well, I want more information first. Is she upset or is she angry? It matters. Do I bring flowers or do I try to figure out what I did wrong before I get home? We have the same question here. This is one of the strongest statements regarding the emotions of Jesus found in the Gospels. So what is John trying to tell us here? Why does the same statement offered by Mary warrant such a completely different response from Jesus? If Jesus is indeed angry or showing fierce indignation, we have to ask why. When Jesus sees the tears of Mary and those with her, is he upset that they are grieving like everyone else, despite all that he has taught them and everything that they have seen from him? Was their sorrow and grief, as Paul puts it in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 13, like others who have no hope? They were standing in the presence of the one who is the resurrection and the life, who showed them the kingdom and its power. But do they truly trust him? So why does Jesus weep? And how do we interpret his tears? Those who had gathered around Jesus that day believe that Jesus' tears are shed because he loved Lazarus. However, he already told his disciples that Lazarus' illness and death were for the glory of God. And Jesus had arrived at Bethany to call Lazarus out of his tomb, not to grieve and weep beside it. So were Jesus' tears shed over his grief for the human condition, for our sin, and the reality of death in this world? As parents, when we see the consequences that our children bring upon themselves from time to time, we might experience these same emotions, just on a much smaller scale. As parents, we experience both anger and grief over the consequences experienced by those we love so dearly. Jesus has come into the world to save and to help his people. But we witness once again that the consequences of our sin are very real. The pain we face in this world is severe and grievous. Here, we find Jesus fully immersed in the human condition, and he cares. I believe Jesus is angry because our lives here on earth matter to him. He weeps because we matter to him. And I can think of no better news that Jesus came because we matter to God. Now, Jesus does not stay outside the city. As he approaches the tomb of Lazarus, Martha is concerned about the smell that would be caused by the decomposition of Lazarus' body. But Jesus reminds Martha, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus turns to his Father in prayer. "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." In Jesus' prayer, we learn that Jesus has already prayed for Lazarus. In fact, we are reminded that the Father always hears his Son. Therefore, this prayer is not for himself or even for Lazarus. Instead, this is a prayer of thanksgiving to demonstrate to those gathered that the power of Jesus' ministry and mission comes from God. And once again, we are reminded of John 3:16. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish, but have eternal life." Then Jesus calls out to Lazarus, and by God's grace, Lazarus obeys. And from death's shadows, Lazarus rises from his tomb to follow Jesus. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.